What do you think of nurses? What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of a nurse? Do you picture an old-fashioned school nurse in a funny hat, taking kids' temperatures and checking their heads for lice? Maybe the first image that pops into your head when you think of a nurse is the infamous naughty nurse, a buxom blonde in a skin-tight, shiny white dress and stiletto heels, cartoonish cleavage on display. Do you think of nursing as disgusting labor, a constant barrage of bodily fluids, one continuous code brown? I'll let you figure out what that means. So what do all these ideas have in common? They're all stereotypes, widely held, fixed, oversimplified images or ideas about a particular group of people. I'm a registered nurse. I work in behavioral health, psychiatric nursing. I started my career on a medical floor and later transferred to psych. When I was in nursing school, my favorite specialty was psych, mainly because the patients reminded me of my family. So I'm a new grad working on the medical floor, and one of my coworkers, Mia, asked me a question. What's your favorite thing about nursing? I thought for a minute, and I said, it's the connections that I make with the people I meet, especially the people with whom I normally wouldn't mix, like a 95-year-old woman who had 14 children, sitting at her bedside, listening to her reminisce about her life. To illustrate my point, I told Mia a story about a patient named Bill. Bill had a reputation among the nurses of being a very irritable and demanding person. So I approached him with an open mind and a big smile, and immediately he started complaining about the other nurse. "A woman of obvious limitations," he said. Then he pointed at the ceiling and said, "Look at all the bugs up there. This hospital's filthy." "Bugs?" I said. "I don't see any. Have you been drinking? Did you bring enough to share?" Bill looked me right in the eyes and said, "Young lady, I haven't had a drink since May 1st, 1972. "Wow," I said, "tell me more." Bill told me that when he was a young man, he was a daily, falling down blackout drunk, and he lost everything because of his addiction to alcohol. He lost his job, his house, his wife and kids. He was on the streets, in and out of jail. And then one day, Bill said, a miracle happened. Some men brought a 12-step meeting into the jail. And even though Bill had heard it all before, for some reason on that particular night, he was ready to hear their message. When he got out of jail, he continued going to the meetings, and he never drank again. Not only that, but he helped countless others to stay sober. He met a beautiful alcoholic woman, and together they traveled the country for decades, speaking at different sober events and carrying a message of hope to people who felt hopeless. "Those were the best times of my life," Bill said. "What a gift. What an incredible gift." And I noticed that Bill's demeanor had completely changed. He was no longer restless, irritable, and discontent. He had a sense of peace. He was at ease. He was genuinely enjoying our conversation, and I was too. I had tears in my eyes. And at that moment, I thought, this is it. This is why I'm here. This is why I became a nurse. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That deep, meaningful human connection between two people who normally wouldn't mix. That, I told Mia, is my favorite thing about nursing. She just gave me a blank stare. She looked like her screensaver had kicked in halfway through my story. "Okay, what's your favorite thing about nursing?" I asked. She answered without hesitation. "Oh, I like the really gross stuff, wound care, cleaning the wounds and the dressings and the drainage and the pus. Oof." I told her I hated cleaning wounds, and I was actually considering a transfer to the psych department. "What are you, nuts?" she said. I guess you can't always have a deep, meaningful human connection. So just like the word nurse, the word alcoholic conjures stereotypical images. Maybe you'd picture a disheveled old man standing on the side of the road, shaking, drinking malt liquor from a 40-ounce bottle concealed in a paper bag. But there's more than just basic stereotyping when it comes to alcoholics. Alcoholics, in many cases, are viewed with downright dismissiveness and disdain. There's a stigma associated with alcoholism. A stigma is a mark of shame or disgrace. A stigmatized individual is instantly discredited and dismissed. The patients I work with as a psychiatric nurse, the members of our community living with mental illness, are subjected to a deeply ingrained societal stigma. The stigma associated with mental illness is so pervasive, it's almost universally accepted. Think about it. Someone will say, "He's crazy," and that's it. Not a legitimate human being, instantly dismissed, either feared or ridiculed. It would be naive for us to think that people with mental illness are oblivious to this. How do you think it affects them? When someone's constantly prejudged, feared, dismissed, ridiculed, the natural response is one of anger and shame. Self-stigmatization occurs when a person internalizes the negative attitudes of society. And the result can be a diminished sense of self-worth, low self-esteem. Many people avoid seeking treatment because of the stigma associated with mental illness. And sometimes the result can even be suicide. I was never aware of how widespread these negative thoughts were until I started working as a nurse. So like I said, when I was in nursing school, my favorite specialty was psych. I loved coming home at the end of the day and telling the outlandish stories, like the young lady who ripped off all her clothes and ran naked down the hallway until the nurses gave her an injection while she kicked and screamed and laughed. Or the bizarre man who babbled incessantly about how the FBI and the CIA were reading his thoughts through a device they had implanted in his neck. I loved talking about the patients, but I wasn't really so comfortable talking to them. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was totally buying into the stigma associated with mental illness, the fear, the ridicule, and I was talking about them like they weren't real people. Flash forward a few years, I'm working on the medical floor, a position opens up in the psych department, I apply for a transfer, and it's approved. I'm excited to start my new job, call my husband, and I say, "Guess what, honey? I got the job in the psych department." How do you think he reacted? He said, "That is amazing. I'm totally comfortable with that. I love psych patients. They're the best." Okay, maybe that's not like exactly what he said verbatim. He said something along the lines of, "Are you sure you want to do that? I'm afraid you won't be safe. You know, one of those, I don't trust them. Maybe someone will attack you." I called a few friends, and their reactions were similar. And they all expressed the same basic ideas about people with mental illness. Dangerous, violent, scary. Why would you want to be in that environment? Well, I started my new job in the psych department. And just like on a medical floor where they have the ICU, the intensive care unit, we have a psych ICU. This is where the most profoundly mentally ill patients are typically admitted. These people are usually suffering with psychosis, a disconnection from reality. Sometimes they're diagnosed with schizophrenia, which is a mental disorder characterized by an inability to understand what's real. They may hallucinate, hearing or seeing things that aren't there. They may have delusions, false illogical beliefs, like paranoia that people are plotting to harm them or controlling their thoughts. Before I started working in the psych department, it was difficult to imagine making a connection with a patient like this. Luckily, I was wrong. There was a patient named Joan admitted when I first started. She was 79 years old. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she was a chronically mentally ill person. She spent her entire adult life in and out of different psych facilities. She was deemed incompetent by the psychiatrist, so her adult son was designated to make her healthcare decisions. Joan definitely had delusions. Not the paranoid type, but she believed she was a high-level hospital administrator and a member of the board of directors, and not an actual psych patient. And because of this, she could be very demanding and dismissive to the doctors and nurses. Joan was awaiting placement in a state-run hospital. So as you can imagine, with the paperwork and the court dates, this never happens quickly. So she was with us for quite a while. She set up a yoga mat and some decorations because she explained she accepted another job as the hospital's activities director. Also, she mentioned she was recently married to one of our staff members, a handsome young nurse named Luis, 50 years her junior. So I worked the night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Every morning at 5 o'clock, I noticed that Joan was in the dining room reading her Bible. I would walk by and say, "Good morning, how are you?" And she would say, "Stop hovering, get away from me, leave me alone." But every morning I would try again, "Hi, Joan, how are you?" And one day, Joan asked me to sit down and read the Bible with her. I sat down and I read chapter 1 from Song of Solomon, which is Joan's favorite. When I was finished reading, Joan did something I had never seen her do before. She smiled and said, "Thank you." I know it doesn't sound like much, but I was totally blown away. And so began our morning ritual. Every night that I worked in the Psych ICU, I would read the Bible with Joan at 5 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes Joan would correct my pronunciation or explain the meaning of the passages that I had just read. And I said, "Joan, I really admire you for getting up early every day to read the Bible, especially when you're working 2 jobs. Joan would pat me on the back and touch my hair. Sometimes she said, "You're such a lovely young lady. You have such a beautiful voice." When I read the line in Song of Solomon that said, "My beloved is mine, and I am his," Joan smiled sheepishly and said, "That's exactly how I feel about my husband, Luis." We really got to know each other during our early morning Bible studies, and I treasure those memories with Joan. I think all of us, we want to make these deep connections, these meaningful connections with other human beings. But the thing about the stigma associated with mental illness and just stigma in general, it takes big groups of people and just automatically disqualifies them. And we miss out on these fulfilling opportunities to connect. So I've decided to keep an open mind, to talk to people instead of talking about them, to give people the benefit of the doubt. Because when I do, I'm usually pleasantly surprised. We can all do our part to transcend the power of stigma by treating all people with the love, tolerance, compassion, and respect that they deserve. Thank you.